The more I study history, the clearer it becomes to me. We know almost nothing about the past. For example, there is the famous French artist Hubert Robert, who lived in the 18th century. He traveled extensively across Europe and painted ruins with astonishing precision. Modern historians claim that these were merely fantasies, a tribute to the fashion of the time. But if you look closely at his works, you see incredibly detailed colonnades, buried levels of buildings, perfectly fitted stone blocks. It feels as though Robert was documenting a reality that had already disappeared rather than inventing it. If that is so, then who built these gigantic structures and how? We see people living among ruins, but what are these ruins? Are they not the remnants of previous civilizations, left to us as an inheritance? The civilization of that time was relatively underdeveloped. It could neither restore nor properly use these structures, and therefore either destroyed them or adapted them for its own needs. Notice how many ruins are used not for their original purpose. They are turned into houses, barns, or simply abandoned. Each of Robert's paintings seems to tell us another world once existed here, more advanced and more magnificent. Yet what remains of these ruins raises uncomfortable questions for our professors, who either politely remain silent or offer complete nonsense in response. As the saying goes, everything we don't know the purpose of must be either a temple or a tomb. Let us look at Robert's paintings together and try to understand what the artist was really trying to show us. Let us begin. This painting is called Interior of the Temple of Diana at Nîmes, painted in 1783. Before us is an ancient temple with majestic columns and perfect masonry. What immediately stands out is that the space is designed for monumental scale. And yet in Robert's paintings, we see people who seem to have wandered in by accident. They are tiny compared to the columns, almost lost among the stone giants. Pay attention to the masonry and architectural details. The blocks are perfectly fitted. The arches and vaults support enormous loads. The ordinary construction methods of the 18th century could not have achieved such precision. But what is especially intriguing is that the lower levels are clearly sunken into the ground. This suggests that the temple had already undergone burial processes, perhaps catastrophic events, long before Robert depicted it. We see people using the space not for its intended purpose. Some walk through the arches, others explore the ruins, as if they were merely a backdrop for life that continues despite the grandeur of the past. Let us move on. This is Ruins of a Terrace in the Park of Marly, painted in 1784. Here Robert depicts a majestic terrace, partially destroyed and fallen into decay. Notice the scale and precision of the architecture, massive blocks, perfectly aligned steps, arches and columns. All of this speaks of a carefully engineered structure designed for longevity. But the people in the painting are tiny and insignificant against the background of these ruins. They walk among the remains like accidental visitors, incapable of understanding or using the greatness that surrounds them. The next masterpiece is Architectural Landscape with a Canal. Here we see a long canal framed by massive ruins of arches and colonnades. The scale is striking. The arches are so tall that people appear like foreign objects beside them. The construction technique is astonishing. Perfectly fitted blocks, vaults supporting immense loads, ornamentation reflecting complex engineering calculations. People walk along the banks like casual observers, unable to uncover the original function of these grand structures. Robert's painting gives the impression that we are looking at the remains of a civilization whose technologies were inaccessible to his contemporaries. Let us continue. This painting is called The Artist Among Ancient Ruins. We see bas-reliefs of some ruined ancient temple. The people of that time could not have built such structures, and certainly could not have restored them after their destruction. Later generations used these spaces merely as a backdrop for life or for practical needs, leaving their original purpose forgotten. It is hard not to ask, what happened to the civilization that created such grand constructions? Robert does not merely record ruins, He shows a world where the high technologies and mastery of the ancients have been almost completely lost. Next, the use of ancient ruins as a public bath. Here Robert shows people bathing among the ruins of majestic structures. The contrast is striking. Massive stone arches and columns designed for enormous loads stand beside the everyday life of ordinary people. They do not realize that they are living amid the legacy of a civilization whose level was incomparably higher than their own. The ruins are clearly used not for their original purpose. Temples or monumental baths have been turned into public pools, and this is ancient temple, the so-called square house at Nîmes. Before us is a massive stone structure with columns in the ancient style. It is immediately clear that this was no ordinary building. The columns and arches support colossal loads, and the corners and joints of the blocks reveal a carefully designed engineering system. In the painting, we see people simply walking through the ruins, probably thinking how to adapt them to their needs. Pieces of the structure lie scattered around. Robert shows us the majestic world of the past, while the people of the 18th century are merely accidental witnesses to something created on an entirely higher level. Here is another interesting painting, Ruins of a Doric Temple, painted in 1783. The temple, classical Doric, with massive columns and strict proportions, was once a symbol of strength and order, but now its remains look as if an entire era has passed since some catastrophe. Some columns still stand, others lie scattered on the ground, overgrown with vegetation. The figures in the foreground, contemporaries of the artist, perhaps travelers or onlookers, are so small compared to the ruins that a sense of dissonance between past and present emerges. They walk among the fragments as if the traces of the former civilization no longer belong to them. They live among them, but do not understand them. Let us continue. Villa Madama near Rome. This is not just a country villa, but a structure that already, in the 18th century, looked like the remains of something older and more grand. Villa Madama was conceived as a luxurious Renaissance residence, but in Robert's painting, we see it not as a completed palace, but as a semi-ruined complex with collapsed vaults, gigantic niches, and massive stone structures. Notice the scale. The arches and halls are not designed for domestic use, but for the display of power and space. Such volumes are excessive even for the nobility of the 18th century. One gets the impression that the Renaissance architects merely reused an existing foundation and structures without fully understanding their original purpose. It is especially important that the destruction does not look like the result of slow decay, but of a sudden event. Stone masses are exposed, terrace levels are disrupted, and the earth seems to have crawled over the architecture. This suggests that the building experienced not just time, but a catastrophe, after which it was never fully restored. The people in the painting again look accidental. They are not masters of this space, they are temporary users. And here, in another painting by Robert, the Colosseum appears as a gigantic, abandoned technological object of the past. Notice, the lower levels of the structure are already buried in the ground. The arches of the first tier are half hidden, which immediately calls into question the official timeline of its antiquity. Such burial does not occur by itself over just a few centuries. Here is another interesting canvas, pavilion with a cascade. At first glance, we see an idyllic park scene, a pavilion, water, a cascade, a stroll. But on closer inspection, it becomes clear that this is not merely decorative 18th century architecture, but the remains of a complex hydraulic structure whose origin raises questions. The water cascade does not look accidental. It is built into a stone structure with strict geometry, massive walls and terraces. Such systems require precise calculations of pressure, levels, and material durability. For a garden ornament, this all looks excessive. Robert shows us not a romantic landscape, but a fragment of a lost system, perhaps part of an ancient water supply or energy complex that over time was turned into a park. And this once again suggests that many architectural ensembles of the past may not have been decoration, but remnants of functional technologies whose meaning was lost. Let us continue. The hermit praying on the ruins of a Roman temple, 1760. Among the gigantic ruins of a Roman temple, massive columns, perfectly fitted blocks, and collapsed vaults, we see a solitary hermit immersed in prayer. The architecture around him is designed for thousands of people, for public rituals, for the demonstration of power and knowledge. But now this space belongs to a single person. The temple has lost its function, and the civilization that built it has disappeared, leaving behind only stone. It is especially important that the ruins do not look like slowly weathered buildings, but like fragments that survived a sudden destruction. Broken columns lie as if they were not dismantled gradually, but smashed by a single powerful force. Lower levels are partially buried, again pointing to burial processes that occurred long before the artist's time. In the painting View of the Port of Ripetta in Rome, Robert shows one of Rome's key ports. But before us is not a bustling trade center, but a strange mixture of an active harbor and ancient ruins, as if the city is using the remains of an older infrastructure. Notice the stone embankments, stairways, and retaining walls. They are made of massive blocks, perfectly fitted together. Such structures are clearly designed for enormous loads, regular floods, and long-term use. This looks more like the engineering of a high civilization than medieval or early modern construction. Hubert Robert's paintings are not merely 18th century art or the romanticization of ruins. They are visual evidence of a world that already then looked like the remains of something lost. Giant architecture buried in earth, used not for its intended purpose, adapted for survival, not for greatness. The more carefully we look at these canvases, the harder it becomes to believe that all this is merely the artist's fantasy or a fashion for ruins. There are too many consistencies, too much engineering logic and scale that cannot be explained by the official version of history. Perhaps Robert and the other ruinists were not dreamers, but witnesses to an era when traces of an ancient, more advanced civilization were still visible to the naked eye, before they were dismantled, built over, or rewritten. If you are interested in the real mysteries of history, alternative interpretations, and a careful look at what is usually considered obvious, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to write in the comments what you think. Were these just ruins, or traces of a world we were never told about?